have 30 people here, and welcome everyone to the session this morning. It's Sitka, a powerful place, and I know most of us wish we were actually in Sitka, but we have three wonderful presenters who will be providing us insights into Sitka's past.
Erik, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that Bill is on and might have a few introductory things to quickly say before you start your panel. Sorry, I forgot.
No, okay.
Just welcome to the second week of the Alaska Historical Society meeting. The schedule is on the Alaska Historical Society website. For those of you that want more information, please know that the sessions are being recorded. So don't tell us anything if you're talking that you don't want on the record, but tell us everything that you're willing to tell us. So with that, Erik, I turn it back to you.
Thank you. Just a couple housekeeping things. For this session, we will allow 5 to 10 minutes for questions after each individual presentation. And our preference is that you either raise your hand or enter a question into the Q&A function. And I will try to monitor the chat, but please try to use the other functions for questions. And our first presenter is Angela Schmidt, who will be presenting historical scenes of Sitka. And Angela is a film archivist with the Alaska Film Archives, a unit of the Alaska and Polar Regions Collections and Archives Department in the Elmer E. Rasmussen Library at University of Alaska Fairbanks. She has worked in various capacities for the Film Archives for 20 years. In 2015, she received a master's degree in Arctic and Northern Studies from UAF. And there is a wonderful profile of her and the work she does that was in the Fairbanks News Miner a couple weeks ago. So I encourage you all to check that out if you haven't already. And I will let Angela take it away. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Erik. I'm gonna stop my video now, and then I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see if this works here. And I should be sharing the sound for this video too. I'm gonna turn the sound all the way up on my computer. So if you need to turn the volume up, you can do that from your own computers. And is it sharing yet? Share. Okay, there we go. So you should be seeing my video now. I will hit play. There we go. So every year I look forward to combing through our collections at the UAF Alaska Film Archives to find films and videos related to the host community for the AHS conference. And I'm sad, as a lot of you are, I'm sure, that we can't be meeting in person in Sitka this year, but I'm pleased to be in the position of being able to share some imagery that might give us the feeling of being in Sitka. And not just the Sitka of today, but also the Sitka of the past as well. So this compilation that I'm showing you today is about 18 minutes long, and it includes some silent segments as well as some segments with audio. So I'll chime in here and there, but otherwise allow you to enjoy these sights and sounds of Sitka. The Film Archives holds about 100 films and videos containing images of Sitka from over the past century or so. These motion pictures include films and videos shot by professionals for commercial use, by amateurs making home movies, programs made by the government and military, educational films, outreach by legislators, and so on. The film we're seeing right now is a travel film, a home movie made while people were traveling. And this is from the 1930s. So these clips are from the Pioneer Pete collection from the 1960s. Pioneer Pete's real name was Victor Rovier. He was an Italian immigrant and an insurance salesman in Anchorage. As a hobby, he traveled all across Alaska during the 50s and 60s, capturing images of everyday people, as well as scenes of commerce and industry. So here we see Sitka's thriving grape juice industry. And then following this are scenes of commercial logging. This is the Sitka pulp mill and the Tongass forest. And then after this, we'll see some scenes of commercial fishing. This next Sitka scene that follows the silent one is from 2005. And I included the upcoming clip to show how some commercial fishing techniques retain a familiar look over the decades.
You good on this one?
Yeah. Watch that one fish gonna want to fall out of there now that I threw it on the bridle. Yeah, I got it. He said yeah and meant no.
Okay, the next three clips are fairly longish. You'll see excerpts from programs made by the US Department of Defense in the 1960s, the Alaska Department of Education also in the 1960s, and clips from a KUAC TV program called Alaska Native Magazine from 1975.
Alaska has come a long way since its discovery in 1741 by Vitus Bering, a Danish sea captain in the service of the Russian Tsar. Russian fur traders and trappers followed, building scattered settlements along the coast. Traces of the Russian period still remain. By the middle of the 19th century, the Russians were anxious to be rid of the vast, distant land. And on March 30th, 1867, Secretary of State William Seward purchased the territory for $7.25 million. In mid-October, with a Marine Honor Guard participating in the ceremonies at Sitka, General Lovell Rousseau accepted the territory for the United States. General Jefferson Columbus Davis became commander of the military district. For the next 10 years, the Army had the responsibility of governing the land in the absence of civilian rule. With almost no communications and transportation facilities, such semblance of government as there was exercised by the commanding general of the troops at Sitka. New garrisons were built and some exploration carried out, but Washington showed little interest in Alaska. Finally, in 1877, the Army troops were withdrawn. For the next few years, the Coast Guard patrolling the shores of the northern land, and then the Navy took on the responsibility for control and administration. the successive commanders of the vessels stationed at Sitka were, for all practical purposes, the government of Alaska. Finally, in 1884, Congress passed a bill which placed a civil government over Alaska. Years passed with little happening to change the pattern of living in the remote region. The Army sponsored various expeditions to explore the interior, and men came back with much information concerning the geography and life of areas where few explorers had ever penetrated.
This is the town of Sitka in southeastern Alaska. It's the home of a large salmon fleet and the center of a busy logging industry providing wood for a nearby pulp mill. Sitka is also the home of Mount Edgecombe School, a boarding high school run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, principally for Alaskan natives who have no other available high school. Here, 620 students get heavy compensatory courses, such as 4-year English and 4-year reading comprehension. Mount Edgecombe School is situated on this former naval base and is reached by boat from Sitka on larger Baranof Island. Wooden barracks, built to house servicemen, and former military mess halls have been turned into dormitories and dining facilities. Administration buildings have become classrooms, and a former aircraft hangar houses the Mount Edgecombe Vocational Education Department. Our tour of Mount Edgecombe School begins in the Vocational Training Center, where young men learn to use metalworking tools and techniques. They cut metal, solder it, turn it on the lathe, and shape and temper it for many uses. There is instruction in welding and brazing metal as well. Girls will find the skills in furniture repair and refinishing they learn here useful later when they have homes of their own. This is a class in the art of native jewelry making using gold, silver, and copper. The teacher is A.P. Johnson, a Tlingit Indian designer who was born and raised in Sitka and has been designing jewelry all his life. Students at Mount Edgecombe represent a cross-section of the state's native population. A student council at Mount Edgecombe School regulates student activities in accordance with the Student Government Constitution. Rules of conduct at school and in the dorms are promulgated here, and a judicial council sits in judgment when the rules are broken. The dormitories have their own student councils and refer matters to the higher court only when necessary. The student council is made up of representatives of all the native groups at the school.
We asked the students at Mount Edgecombe what they least like about the school.
It's rain. It rains a lot. Too much here. The rain, so. Just rains a lot.
I like snow better than the rain. I think if it didn't rain so much, it would be a better place.
I think it's the rain. It rains a little bit too much up here. It rains too much.
Rain.
It rains every day.
But rain.
It rains too much.
So the following scenes are home movies made by Jack Calvin. I would say that this is our premier Sitka collection. Jack Calvin was born in Montana. He grew up on the West Coast, and he moved in 1919 to Alaska, where he worked in canneries and sawmills. He received a master's degree in English literature from Stanford University in 1924 and went on to write several adventure stories. He and his newlywed wife, Mary Sasha Kashabaroff, paddled by canoe from Tacoma, Washington to Juneau in about 1929. Sasha's father was the Reverend Andrew P. Kashavarov, who served as Dean of St. Michael's Cathedral in Sitka. So that's where Jack and Sasha decided to take up residence as well. And Jack filmed many scenes in his community. In 1959, Jack Calvin wrote and published a book outlining the history of Sitka. It's titled Sitka, A Short History. And during the 1960s, he campaigned for the establishment of wilderness areas in Southeast Alaska. We hold videotape copies that were made from Jack Calvin's films, but unfortunately not the original films themselves, which had been lost prior to donation of this collection. We're thankful that at least the videos have survived and can be preserved, even though the images are maybe not as high quality as the original films might have been. Here's a quick glimpse of Sheldon Jackson College, which will be mentioned again in just a minute here. My objective in bringing these images to your attention today is to make you aware of resources that exist in our archive, and to demonstrate how viewing historical motion pictures can help historians in their research, by helping them to formulate questions, by giving them an opportunity to observe and perhaps gain new understandings, and by providing insights into the viewpoints of the day. Motion pictures bring to life past visions and hopes for the future, and help us to see the world through the eyes of people who came before us. Here is the Reverend, or Father A.P. Kashavarov. He was an Aleut Russian man, born in 1863 when Alaska was still under Russian rule. In addition to his service in the Russian Orthodox Church, he was founder of the Alaska Territorial Historical Library and Museum. And today in Juneau, we have a building named in his honor. And this next clip I wasn't going to include, but then I thought, well, this is interesting. Here, the third Thursday in October is being circled. And today is the third Thursday in October. So it seemed very auspicious to include this 80-year-old clip, which begins a little ominously, doesn't it? This is a short comedic murder mystery that was performed and filmed by Jack Calvin and his Sitka friends, probably on one of those rainy Sitka evenings. If you want to watch the whole mystery, it's about 15 minutes long, and you can go to YouTube and search for Alaska Film Archive's Murder is Fun, and it will pop right up. It's fun to watch. It's a little bit obtuse. There are a lot of inside jokes, but it's fun to watch this cast of Sitka characters have so much fun. And following this is the final Sitka clip that I have for you today.
Folks, I have with me in the national capital, Roland Armstrong of Sitka. He's president of Sheldon Jackson Junior College. I guess it's the only junior college in Alaska, isn't it, Rolly?
Yes, it's the only boarding school of high school and junior college status. Of course, the University of Alaska has community colleges, and we work together.
Well, Sheldon Jackson, considering its predecessors, is really the oldest institution of education in this state, isn't it?
It was established in 1878, and Sheldon Jackson saw the need for education in Alaska and followed that through. But that was the beginning of Sheldon Jackson School.
And at first was a boys' school, and then it became coeducational, and then it became a high school, and now a junior college, is that right?
High school and junior college, 6 years.
Well, you know, it so happens that Roland Armstrong is the first person from Sitka on this program. That's a matter of regret to me, but it just so happens that no Sitkans have been in the capital in the last year or two.
Well, we're finding another change in our student body relationships. I'm sure this is true throughout Alaska, but primarily at Sheldon Jackson. The school was established for native young people. But on the last census in our high school, 27% of our young people were white.
Well, I think we all appreciate the fact that there is a somewhat purer democracy in Alaska than in many other states. People there are judged for what they are and what their character is, and not on the basis of race, color, or creed. And that is certainly desirable, and I hope we can strengthen that. There was a time when, you know, there was a certain amount of racial prejudice, but I think that's fading out very rapidly if it hasn't gone completely.
I think we always have to be on our guard for it, because it can be brought in, as almost as a disease is brought in into a community. And we should always be on our guard in our relationships together to keep this Alaska of ours as free from discrimination as possible.
Well, I don't know of any better note on which to end our conversation, Roland. It's been very nice to have had you and Mrs. Armstrong here in the Capitol.
Thank you, sir.
So thanks very much for your time today. And quickly before I end my talk, I wanted to thank the National Film Preservation Foundation, which has been instrumental lately in helping us preserve film collections. In 2019, we received a grant to preserve Harry Leonard's films. And you'll see Harry Leonard here, along with his faithful sidekick. Leonard was a prospector and miner in the Wiseman area in interior Alaska in the 1930s. And just this year, we've received $20,000 to preserve this collection over the upcoming year. These are films that show activities, work, and play on the Pribilof Islands just prior to World War II. If anybody happens to have contacts with the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, or if you know of any other Pribilof organizations that I could reach out to, please let me know. I want to make sure that folks who are interested in these films are able to see and obtain copies if they wish, especially if there are any family connections. So again, thanks very much. If you have any questions or feedback at any time, please drop me an email. And please check out our Alaska Film Archives YouTube channel or our new Alaska and Polar Regions digital repository. And if you get in touch with anyone who works for the archives at UAF, we can point you toward these websites and other resources. There we go. And I just want to say too that October is National Archives Month, so let me put it in a plug for that. Yay for archives.
Thank you, Angela. So now we have a few minutes for questions. First, Ron chimed in, so who done it? I think that might be referring to the, oh, you're on mute, Angela.
I'm not gonna tell you, you have to watch it yourself, Ron. And thanks, Rachel Mason. I'll touch base with you. Angie, is there an effort to identify individuals in the films as there are with historical photos? You know, periodically we have initiatives where we do that. It's not a focused ongoing effort. It's collection by collection, whatever project we might happen to be working on. If anyone in Sitka would like me to send them a batch of Sitka films so that they could, you know, organize an identification event, I'd be happy to do that.
Someone in the Q&A asked for your email address also.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't, what's the best way to share that? Should I just type it in there?
Yeah, or maybe in the chat.
AJ Schmidt
Yeah,
at alaska.edu.
I already sent it, Angie.
Okay, oh, cool, thanks, all right.
So look in the Q&A, people, it's
Oh, I think I just sent it to all the panelists. Well, anyway.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I have to leave early today. I feel really badly about that. My schedule isn't usually quite this crazy, but everything fell on Thursday morning this week.
So here's a question that just came in. What is the best way to assess your holdings, videos, archives, especially when you do not know what is on the films? Did you run into this issue when digitizing these films?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. We do have an ability to view films before we digitize them. We have a setup in our film lab with a little view scope, and I can put the reels up on the view scope and kind of wind through the film to see what the images are. Or, you know, even if you didn't have that, if you had a film that you wanted to look at, you could unwind it off the reel a little bit and use a magnifying glass to look at what some of the images are on the reel. So yeah, we always have a really good idea of what's on our films before we send them out to be digitized, or before I write a proposal to have them digitized. But it's very labor intensive working with film and video and media. Anyone who's involved in that occupation, you probably know. You know, even just editing together these film clips takes considerable time to look at the footage and decide what you want to show, and then to edit it together. But it's really meaningful work. I really love the physicality of working with all of these different film materials and videotape materials. And I enjoy working with a lot of the older formats. It's really rewarding.
Such important work. Ron just put in a new question. What's the earliest Sitka footage? Its source, is it the earliest Alaska footage? I don't know if you can answer those questions.
Yeah, items in our collection go back to about the 1920s. I don't know that we have anything really much earlier than that that isn't also held by, you know, the National Archives and so on. I think that our earliest Sitka films, well, it would have been that 1930s Romig collection that I showed at the beginning of this, the video that I showed you today. And then I'm also thinking, there might be some from the late 20s that we have, but it was so short. It was just like, here's Sitka, that I didn't include that.
I just want to remind the attendees that when you put questions or comments in the chat and you want all the other audience members to see it, make sure that blue box says all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, the question just comes to the presenters and moderator.
I hope I get a chance to visit Sitka someday. I've actually never been to Sitka. So I think it would be really neat to see the, you know, the old pioneer home and St. Michael's Cathedral.
Hey, Angela, this is Anne, the panelist, your fellow panelist, and that was really fun. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Give folks another minute or so, and
so for Archives Month, if you're on social media, we've been putting a lot of film clips and also clips from other collections, oral history and photos and manuscripts to social media. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're on those social media platforms, you've probably been seeing a lot from the Alaska and Polar Regions collections and archives this month. And I encourage everyone to check out our new Alaska and Polar Regions Collections and Archives digital repository. This is a place, especially for film archives, it's going to be very useful because in the past we've been putting all our films onto DVDs, which people can check out from the library, but DVD players are going away. So I think our next avenue for getting materials out to people is going to be a digital platform where people can just access items online. And of course we have YouTube where people can look at all the fun little clips, but the digital repository will be a place where people can really do some research and see the whole film or the whole program or videotape, whatever it might be, the item in the collection.
there's a new comment in the Q&A that is requesting that you come to Sitka.
Ah, I would love to.
Do a local.
As soon as we can travel.
And yes, that could have been a great workshop during the conference. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and that it would have been an opportunity for people in Sitka to provide ID information.
Right.
So hopefully, Angie, you can get there sometime in the future to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I would love that.
I just wanted to say that it was great clips and so timely. That just amazing that, you know, third week in October thing, and then the discussion about diversity and inclusion with greening. What year was that? I mean, that's just amazing that they were talking about it then.
Yeah, 1965, just off the top of my head is what I recall for that one.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing those. And it's fun to see how Sitka has changed or has not changed in some of the scenes in those films. And so great for historical purposes. And I loved seeing all the different styles of clothing.
Yeah.
Wearing the woman in her riding outfit.
1962 for the greening clip.
So, guess we're about time for the next presentation. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And I look forward to hearing everyone's recordings for the next sessions. I'm sorry I have to duck out now, but thanks a lot and best wishes.
Great, thank you. And our next presenter is Ann Poulnow, who will be presenting on Tlingit place names. Ann is the owner of Sea Level Consulting, a cultural resource firm based in Sitka, Alaska, started in 2008. As an archaeologist, she specializes in Southeast Alaska archaeology and history, and the unique laws and regulations relating to the preservation of cultural resources and heritage. Ann is committed to assisting communities, small nonprofit corporations, and Native organizations with their preservation goals, often in a volunteer capacity. She has written, been awarded, and managed Historic Preservation Fund grants to assist in the rehabilitation of historic buildings and preservation planning, including the 100-year-old Alaska Native Brotherhood Camp No. 1 Hall and Lincoln Street Historic Business District in Sitka. In 2007, Ann began serving on the City and Borough of Sitka's Historic Preservation Commission, 4 years as chair. During her tenure, Ann initiated public meetings and negotiations with property owners to successfully secure voluntary preservation deed restrictions for the Sheldon-Jackson National Historic Landmark Campus. She developed the community's historic preservation plan and spearheaded the Lincoln Street Historic Business District nomination to the National Register. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ann. Thanks.
Thank you. Everyone have my screen? You can hear me?
We don't have the screen yet.
Oh. Oh, how's that?
Yep, that's great.
There we go. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Some of those projects Erik mentioned are still in the works, but thank you for allowing me to share this project that we've been working on since 2014, Tlingit place names and the Katlian Bay Road project. I first want to perform a land acknowledgement. I have the honor and privilege to work in the Tlingit Ani, the traditional territory of the Sitka Tlingit and the Shiataka Chikakwan lands. I'm also dedicating this presentation to Richard Nelson. My work is more environmental compliance, Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act. And, but I am an anthropologist, you know, specializing in archaeology. Richard Nelson had always been a mentor, and in the way that when I see him, I like giving this presentation, I get a little flustered. I view him as a star like Brad Pitt. And so I saw him walking down the street one day, and I got up the nerve to talk to him a little bit about my conundrum, my professional conundrum of, you know, doing this work, Section 106 work in archaeology, because you go into archaeology and anthropology thinking you're gonna do what Richard does, and as an anthropologist, bringing these beautiful cultures to the rest of society. And whereas I was performing, working in the construction field, and so I brought that question and you know, my concerns to Richard about what I'm doing in the field, and he wonderfully gave me the confidence to know that in my field I have the opportunity to share share with folks in our community and in our society the history of the people in a different way, to find places where I can do this. And this Katlian Bay Road project is one of those places where I was able to find a place where I can share and make this construction project count in more ways than just another road. And my first book was Shadow Hunter, and then I went on to read The Island Within, and I highly recommend that anyone with teenage boys or nephews or whatnot to recommend them to read The Island Within. My fiance's sons got a lot out of it. So as I mentioned, most of my work is environmental compliance, so Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, meaning any project, well, most of you probably know Section 106, that any federal undertaking, such as permitting, the federal funding, any sort of association with federal, it kicks in the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and we have to do an investigation and identify cultural resources that might be there and impacted by the project. So I first started in as owning my own firm, Sea Level Consulting, in 2008. I was working for another resource firm in monitoring, and the state approached me, the state DOT approached me to do this quick evaluation of the, quote, No Name Creek Bridge. And as they were performing some upgrades. Well, at that same time, I joined the Sitka Historic Preservation Commission as the secretary. I wasn't an honored member just yet, but I had, and that was in, well, I started at the Preservation Commission in the year 2000. As a secretary, as a young anthropologist and archaeologist, I think I was still volunteering at the Forest Service at that time. But one thing that struck me then is this common theme of, especially No Name Creek, that it has a name. And it was, I was honored to be on that commission, or be the secretary for that commission, with Mark Jacobs Jr., Irene Jimmy, Thad Poulson was the chair, and Herb Diedrichsen. So some amazing and wonderful mentors and cultural carriers here in Sitka that I learned a lot from and were quite influential for me. But the fact that No Name Creek has a name, and this was the first time I heard this from Mr. Jacobs back in the early 2000s. When I got this project in 2008 with the DOT, although there was, quote, no historic properties affected, I put a little extra recommendation that we add the Tlingit names to the geographic signs. And the state DOT was very much willing to do that. And made sure we got it right. At first, I think we did put an underline on the K, and it was quickly brought to our attention, and DOT quickly replaced that sign with the proper spelling and pronunciation inflections. I further had a DOT project where they were just repaving the road. So my scope of work for my archaeological investigation was very narrow in repaving the road. But I again took advantage of that and worked with Ethel McKinnon to name an archaeological site in that area along Halibut Point Road, and put that name into the record. So there's onto the Katlian Bay Road project that began in 2014. This is the road project begins at the end of Halibut Point Road and goes 9.6 miles out into Katlian Bay. And it's a single lane road with a few pullouts and view sheds, and then a picnic area at the end. So my job, I was subcontracted with a very, very large environmental firm. And this gentleman in the picture is one of my colleagues from Indiana, who also, like the kids at Mount Edgecombe, thinks it rains too much here. But we had a couple of nice days, as you can see from this photo. This is a piling in the bay. So to perform the archaeological investigation per Section 106, Section 106 kicked in because there was the core permit. Most of this money is for the project is state funded, but because of the core permit, it kicked in Section 106. So we begin with the archival research, and the archival research is basically what I'm doing is sometimes I perform oral history interviews, but I'm just collecting a lot of stories because we don't have as much time as a lot of research projects to gather a lot of new information, and there's already a lot out there thanks to Dr. Thornton and others, and the Downhowers, of course. So I gathered a lot of archival information, historical and oral histories about the area, and included it in the project reporting. The archival information included some paleo shoreline modeling, identifying where sites might be at higher levels. We had old maps from the Sargavin excavations, and then homestead surveys from the middle of the bay. So we take some of this archival information, and of course old aerial survey photos, and we perform a field survey. The homestead survey at the head of the bay is associated with a woman named Mary Dean that came to Sitka around 1929, and she had noted there was a dairy farm out at Katlian Bay, and she all by herself hired some high school gentlemen to come out and help her establish the dairy again, and she had some fur farms out there. So these are the remains that we found from her homestead. We noted culturally modified trees in the area, clusters of them, clusters of triangle bark stripped ones. Bark is stripped for the cambium underneath and used as a material for making rope to further make baskets and matting and whatnot. There's quite a few blaze marked trees. By this top right blaze mark, there was also some old trapper boxes And then a couple oval scars that could possibly be a source of extracting pitch. And then some newer, relatively newer historic logging springboard notches were also identified out there. So we performed some survey tests, checked the eroded banks for shell middens, and made some recommendations. So based on not really finding anything through shovel testing, but having this archival information and the oral history studies that we concluded from the area, we did recommend archaeological monitoring. And we also recommended the Tlingit Placenames for the points of interest that they were, the DOT had drawn into the project plans. So I was assigned to go to the Sitka Tribal Alaska Council to gather their assistance in developing these Tlingit place names. We used several different resources. They suggested that I work with a smaller committee, and Ethel McKinnon, who is the daughter of Charlie Joseph Sr., who began writing down place names in the region, all over Baranof Island, as you can see this from this map on the left, these points. He began doing this in 1975. On the left-hand side, this map shows some of the place names and the work that Dr. Tom Thornton has done. So with Robbie Littlefield, Tlingit language expert and who works quite often with Ethel McKinnon, we got our assignment of where these, where we were looking to place these names. Here's a closer look at the actual road alignment. So we start down here at Halibut Point Road, and it goes all the way out into the bay. So all these points along the way are sites in which they were going to have bridges and pullouts. They provided me with this better mapping of where actual signage would be. And from here, I took this to the committee, and we worked together to develop names. So the first one here is Mosquito Cove. I do have I won't dare to pronounce all of these. Getting a little bit better, but I'm going to play the Mosquito Cove one for you. Mosquito Cove. Gate. And then it goes on to this is a pull-off area that has a great view shed. And so working with Ethel, she made note of a lot of places that where, especially this one right here, this pull-off, it is close to, it's not quite at, because this is a view shed at a higher elevation, but down below this view shed is where Ethel noted the canoes would haul out and fish coho, and also in that area we noticed a lot of culturally modified trees. So this down here at Horseshoe Bend, number 8, is where the Trapper box is, and they did honor a lot of the historic sites that we uncovered, and so that one's the Trapper box. Mosquito cold. So again, we continue along the road alignment. This is towards the end of the road. They weren't quite sure what to name this recreational area, and the suggestion was to suggest a site that recognized the Kiksati Survival March. And so we associated with our grandparents' land. I'll play the Sukahim one. So a river. So all the Katlian River. So not only was the DOT amenable to including these place names, they put it on their project plans, which was quite impressive. I've never seen project plans that include the place names. So these are just go along the road. The construction firms use these plans, of course, to construct, and I was quite excited to see the Tlingit names on these DOT plans, and brought them to the cultural committee, and they were quite pleased as well. So we continue to monitor as this project goes on 6 years later, and we've recorded several more clusters of culturally modified trees. This is a sheet that we record the trees. I'm very excited about the culturally modified trees, and so I do make a great effort to record the data from them and perform cores. So thank you for listening, and it's good stuff, and I appreciate all the people that have done all the work before me, such as Dr. Thornton and Charlie Joseph, and the opportunity to work with Ethel. Thank you. Ganeshish.
Great. That's thank you for that presentation, Ann. I learned a lot about place names and projects that are insightful for some of the work that I do up at Denali. But we now have an opportunity for questions. We'll have about 5 or 10 minutes. So if people want to either raise their hand or put questions in chat, feel free to enter those.
I can't see the chat. I don't know what's.
No questions at the moment, but we'll get folks a couple minutes here.
Whoops.
And the first comment that came in is, I've always heard of a dairy farm out near Herring Cove, the opposite end of the road. It's very interesting to hear there was one also in Katlian Bay.
Yeah, actually the history goes back before the dairy farm from Mrs. Dean. It was a place where Anna Hollywood, who was a Tlingit woman, married a Caucasian man, and they went out to the bay at the turn, or when Alaska was purchased, and started growing hay out there for the troops. So it's a really amazing history, besides the pre-contact traditional use out there. And I hope it's all incorporated in these signs and an understanding of the place. The road itself was developed for recreation, supposedly. So hopefully part of that is an understanding of what was there before we all go out there and play.
And we have a couple more minutes if folks have questions. We'll wait another minute. It's also, possible as people are formulating their thoughts and questions. We will probably have a little bit of time. Rebecca will be answering questions related to her presentation at the end of her presentation, but we could circle back around and talk a little bit more about Sitka history.
Erik, Ron Inouye had his hand raised, and so I gave him permission.
Great, thank you.
That was a great presentation. I have two questions for you. One is on the cultural and modified trees, whether you are aware of Mary Ida Hendrickson's fire trees. She published that book, and I don't know if it's widely accepted as being legitimate. Then secondly, with the place names, are they generally descriptive or named after people or after what you can see from that place? And then how many of them are for maybe the way the land was used, like a place where people went looking for gumboots or other things that aren't superficially available when you just look at the land? It's where they gather roots or other kinds of things for the use of the land. Thanks.
Yes, I'm finding that most of the names are named after how the land was used by the Tlingit people and the resource that was there. The Halibut Point Road paving project, where we noted the stoneware in the archaeological site. I went to Ethel and I said, we have to name this for the report. And she's like, well, I don't know what to name it. I don't know if it's my place. And I said, well, the reports do, and I have to name it. So she named it Weir Place to Get Fish Across from Blueberry Island. I guess it was a little island. Well, there is a little island out front where they harvested blueberries. So they're mostly descriptive names. The other one out at where she said that they gathered coho, and so yeah, a lot of them are mostly where descriptive of where you fish and hunt and gather resources.
Thanks for the question, Ron.
What about the fire trees?
The fire trees, that's funny because I have a project in Ketchikan. We don't have many fire trees up here, but I actually have this book out because there's a lot of fire trees down in south of here. We don't have red cedar up here. We have yellow cedar, so it's a little bit, I'm finding that culturally modified trees are a little bit different. Just the ones that I've noticed, and that's part of doing this compliance work. You don't always get to survey where you want to survey, and so yeah, I haven't noticed a lot of fire trees up here, but I'm actually investigating a lot of that, the fire trees down in the Ketchikan area right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's a question that came in over chat from Kathy Price, who works at DOT. And said she hadn't seen your report, and she was wondering if it was done for Army Corps or the DOT.
Well, that's up to the SHPO to answer that one, I think, at this point. Yeah. I was working for a very large firm that, I've learned a lot here and there, and, how to I don't know, I guess stick up for myself a little bit in my writing, but yeah, it was under another firm, so I was not as influential in the political permitting, but it's my opinion that it was a Section 106 because there was a core permit involved, but it was definitely DOT, and the Alaska Historic Preservation Act also kicks in on that, and the DOT regulations.
And another question that just came in from Yoko Kugo. Thank you for your presentation. Have you recorded a place that has more than one Tlingit name?
I don't think so. different pronunciations or spellings or inflections, I would say. Yeah, I haven't noticed more than one name. That would probably be a better question for Dr. Thornton. I also want to acknowledge Robbie Littlefield, who is very helpful in facilitating interviews with Ethel McKinnon. And I did mention Ethel is the daughter of Charlie Joseph Sr. Yeah, Robbie's a wonderful person to work with.
Karen, I'm okay. I was getting a note that you potentially wanted to answer a question, but I can't tell if that was just a function of the chat. But feel free to chime in, Karen, if you have something.
Me, Karen?
I think it was probably just something in the chat box that you were
Yeah, something else going on in the chat box.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with that, we're up to the final presentation. So thank you, Anne. If people have questions, there may be time at the very end if you have more questions for Anne. But the final presentation is from Rebecca Poulson. It's Sitka in the 1880s, Small Town Politics and Personalities that Shaped Alaska. Rebecca is an artist in Sitka, publisher of the Outer Coast Calendar of Art and Poetry. She has been exploring archives and conducting oral history interviews for a book about the history of Sheldon Jackson School and College, and recently spearheaded Voices of Sheldon Jackson, a multimedia interpretive project at sjvoices.org. In 2018, she received a Certificate of Archival Excellence from the Alaska State Historical Records Advisory Board for a school curriculum on Alaska's first decade under American rule, and is active in historic preservation, leading work on the World War II Japonski Island Boathouse and Sheldon Jackson School National Historic Landmark. She jars fish and freezes berries for her family, and when there's no pandemic on, she writes, directs, and creates sets for theater and teaches art to young people. She is a member of the Alaska Historical Commission and was just elected to another term on the Alaska Historical Society Board of Directors. And I will let you take it, Rebecca. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a little disconcerting because I can't see myself, but can everyone see my slide?
Yes, it looks great.
Oh, great.
We see you as well.
Great. So I'll try not to drool or do anything freaky. Sitka in the 1880s, Politics and Personalities that Shaped Alaska. And first, I'd like to acknowledge Tlingit Ani, the ancestral land of the Tlingit people. And I'm starting with some photos by Edward Muybridge taken in 1868. And this particular building was where the Alaska court was for many years. Several court cases involving the Presbyterian Mission and Tlingit rights were heard in the Alaska District Court in Sitka in 1885 and 1886. These cases helped define the relationship of Tlingit people to the government and contributed to a narrative of Tlingit culture that lingers today. In the Alaska District Court's first session in 1885, case number 7, Schmakoff et al. Versus Sheldon Jackson et al., a group of Sitka residents disputed the mission land claim. Cases number 9 and 10 challenged the right of the mission to keep children against the will of their parents. And in the second year of the court in 1886, number 32 was In Re Kanakukwa, again asking for release of a child from the mission. And number 34, In Re Sakwa, was a case about Tlingit slavery. This is Sitka in 1867 from the Coast Pilot. Alaska became part of the United States in 1867, but was a district administered by the U.S. Army until 1877, the Treasury Department until 1879, and the U.S. Navy until first civil government came with the 1884 Organic Act. For 17 years, Alaska had no civil government. And so what was the legal situation for the Tlingit people in these years? And that's a good question. Before 1867, when Russia claimed Alaska, Tlingit people held all their lands and had complete sovereignty. As General Jeff Davis, the first Army commander, put it, before the transfer, they looked upon themselves as the de facto rulers of this territory and the Russians only as traders, here by permission or sufferance. Tlingit law was well known to the Russians and to others who traded in the Northwest coast. The Russian authorities followed Tlingit law in their dealings with Tlingit people. What is not commonly known is that this law was familiar to the US military and respected as valid for Tlingit internal affairs and was even occasionally followed in white Tlingit interactions. As set out by Captain Lester Beardsley, commander of the USS Jamestown at Sitka 1879-1880, and echoed by other Navy leaders in Southeast, the Indians have a code of laws based upon their ideas of strict justice. If one Indian inflicts a blow or any other injury upon another, the matter can be, and frequently is, adjusted at a consultation in which both families are represented either by the indicting of an equal injury or by the payment to the injured party of an equivalent. Even a life taken can be settled for in this way, payments being made according to the amount assessed in slaves, furs, or blankets. By the unwritten but thoroughly established provisions of this law, a man who sells or gives to another liquor from the effects of which death ensues is responsible for the death and must pay the assessed value. If an Indian dies while in the house of another or is killed in any way while in the employ of another, the house owner or employer is responsible. The Indians seldom fail to yield to this, the very foundation of their laws, and a refusal to make equitable reparation is always a cause of war. So in the well-known case of the shelling of Cake villages in 1869, the United States Army killed men leaving Sitka by canoe, refused to pay that compensation. Relatives of two of the victims from Cake killed two unrelated Euro-Americans at what is now Murder Cove on Admiralty Island. The military then demanded they be turned over for American justice, and when they were not, destroyed 3 Cake villages. That is an example of the military insisting on the American justice system over the Tlingit system. But later in 1869, General Davis paid the family of a youth killed by an Army policeman in order to prevent white bloodshed. In the case of another death from the original inciting incident of the Cake War, a private trader paid compensation to the family of a Chilkat man in order to get them to not boycott trade with Sitka. So what was the official federal policy toward Tlingit law? The 1867 treaty says that the, quote, uncivilized tribes were subject to federal laws regarding them. And in 1869, Secretary of State William Seward confirmed that Alaska was Indian country, as set out in an 1834 federal statute, being any place Native people still occupied their land and ruled themselves. The U.S. Attorney General confirmed that Alaska was Indian country in 1873. In Indian country, according to that 1834 statute, Native crimes are taken care of with Native justice. Also in 1873, the U.S. Supreme Court decided Crow Dog, a case where Crow Dog had killed another member of his tribe, and that since justice could be done by the tribe, the United States could not intervene. That all seems very clear. But then in 1878, a different U.S. Attorney General decided Alaska was not Indian country. And this question was further confused by Judge Matthew Deedy, of the U.S. District Court in Portland, Oregon, who had jurisdiction over Alaska. He argued when cases came to his court from Alaska that Alaska is not Indian country. And I'm by no means a lawyer, but his reasoning is far from convincing. And in one of the cases, he claimed the Army could act only as a civilian authority and so could not hold a defendant more than 5 days, which does not work when the courtroom is over 1,000 miles away. That particular defendant later sued the Army's commanding officer from the time for unlawful imprisonment, sued him in civil court. But twice, when Tlingit defendants reached Didi's court, he quickly sentenced them to be hanged and then to be dissected at a medical school. Judge Didi's opinion that Alaska was not Indian country was probably rooted in racism and a conviction that Native people should not have any right to govern themselves, but should be subject to the so-called white law. And I'm using white in the way people used it in the 19th century to mean Euro-American. Because of those decisions and the threat of being sued for false imprisonment, military commanders used their own judgment, knowing they were acting outside the law, but trying to maintain peace, their one unambiguous mandate. The Army left Sitka in 1877, and Tlingit people tore down the stockade and imposed Tlingit law on a merchant, compelling him to pay for a death caused by alcohol he had sold. In the spring of 1879, white residents sent to Victoria for a warship to protect them from the Tlingit. The USS Jamestown with Captain Beardsley arrived in June 1879. Beardsley found that the instigation for the panic was a demand by Katlian, a Kikseti leader, for compensation and wages owed from the deaths of 5 of his clansmen while working on a whaling ship, San Diego. In 1880, a Tlingit man killed his wife, whose brother then killed him, and Beardsley left justice to the Tlingit system. In 1881, a man killed himself in jail, and Beardsley's successor, Henry Glass, encouraged the relatives of the accuser to pay the family of the dead man. They did also sometimes punish Tlingit individuals, believing that it was necessary to show they were not intimidated. And of course, in 1882, when Tlingit people requested compensation for a death from a whaling company, Commander Merriman of the USS Adams instead asserted very strongly American law over Tlingit law, and with the US revenue cutter Corwin, destroyed most of the settlement of Angoon. This policy of recognizing Tlingit authority was probably only because it was expedient. Beardsley notes as late as 1880 that in case the Tlingit people came together, the whites of Sitka would not be able to defend themselves. So all the way up to 1884, Alaska was officially not Indian country, but the US military in Alaska often treated it as if it were. The first officials of Alaska's civil government arrived in the fall of 1884. The first term of the court in May 1885 was busy. Case number 7 was based on a petition by a group of residents protesting the Presbyterian land claim, which is now Sheldon-Jackson College campus, saying it would create a second Indian village that would threaten the white town, that the land was properly part of the town site, that it blocked access to the river, timber, the national cemetery, and a cranberry bog. The Presbyterian plat was actually in the Organic Act itself, which promised 640 acres to any, quote, established mission. The protest probably had more to do with Alaska District Court case number 6, which was Anna Richter versus Sitka Trading Post et al. Before 1884, it was illegal to claim or to buy or sell real estate, but the collector of customs nevertheless recorded claims. John Brady claimed the mission plat as a homestead in 1879. Henry Imhoff and Nicholas Dern claimed the same piece of property for a brewery in 1880. Imhoff used his deed to secure a loan of $700 from W.F. Richter. Brady transferred the property to the mission in 1882. Anna was the widow of W.F. Richter and was suing John Brady and his business partner for taking the property. That case was ultimately decided against her because Imhoff turned out also owed a debt to Brady's Sitka Trading Company for materials and supply, and because she had not protested at the time the mission took the property. Also, Imhoff had spent a fair part of 1881 and 1882 in federal custody. The petition against the mission was brought by a group that included relatives of Mrs. Richter, who was one of the Russian residents of the town, as well as several miners. Case number 7 gave rise to cases 16, 18, 19, 20, and 21, all against Presbyterian missionary Sheldon Jackson. 16 was over interference with a grand jury and was dismissed. 18 through 21 are all against Sheldon Jackson personally for building a fence around the mission, blocking one road that went diagonally across the campus, and the fence went too far into what is now Lincoln Street. The district attorney and the judge agreed that this was so serious that he had to post first $500, then $800 bail, and was even taken briefly into custody right as the monthly steamer was leaving, causing him to miss the steamer. Those cases were all ultimately dismissed and did not have a permanent impact on the mission or on Native people. But cases 9 and 10 did. These were petitions on behalf of the parents of 2 students who wanted to leave the school. The court decided that it was not legal to make a contract with a Native person and that you can't hold someone against their will. The mission was making parents sign a 5-year contract in order to send their children to the school. The court decision led to more than half the students at the school leaving. And this is very simplified, but I think you can look at 2 opposing alternatives. One is the Indian country style sovereignty, or Native people have right to govern themselves. The other is Sheldon Jackson style assimilation, which applies white laws to Native people. In the 1870s and early 1880s, Tlingit leaders asked for schools and missions. Beardsley reported that threatening to keep a child from going to school was a good way to get cooperation. However, Glass, his successor, felt it necessary to compel Tlingit children to attend the day school. That first Alaska administration seemed to lean more toward sovereignty. Governor Kincaid, in his report to Congress for 1885, recommended granting Tlingit ownership of their homes, gardens, and fisheries, although he also wanted separation from the white communities on the model of Metlakatla, British Columbia, where Native members had their own sawmill and other industries. So thanks to Sheldon Jackson, Alaska's next government in 1886 were his supporters. When that court heard case 32 in 1886, decided as Enre Kuakokwe, it was another petition by a mother wishing to take her son out of the school. The judge decided that the school could not let a child go home because that would, quote, render all efforts of both the government and missions to civilize them abortive. In case 35, Enre Sakwa, it seems to be purely about interference in Tlingit sovereignty. This case was brought by attorney Willoughby Clark on behalf of Sakwa, who told how he had been captured as a child, traded as a slave, but identified his alleged owner as his father, explaining that Tlingit people adopted people just as whites did. The defendant did not appear, and witnesses did not back up the assertion that Sakwa was a slave or was in any way restrained. Nevertheless, the judge freed him and struck down Tlingit slavery. The district attorney, Mottram D. Ball, represented the defendant. He had been appointed collector of customs back in 1878, and so was a veteran of the military era in Sitka. His argument that the Tlingit are indeed self-governing and that this is Indian country is logical and convincing. The judge rejected this, saying that the Tlingit are organized by family and not as a tribe, so they are not sovereign and Alaska is not Indian country. He also includes a statement that, quote, slavery in its most shocking form has been thoroughly interwoven with the social polity of the Indians of Alaska, and that, quote, the pitiable spectacle of his once stately form is an evidence of the blighting curse of slavery. This decision, the entire case, and especially the language, reflects Sheldon Jackson's assimilation narrative that is seen throughout his writings, as in his first annual report on education for 1885, where he described losing half the student body who would, quote, go back to the filth, superstition, degradation, and vice of their native condition. These are some propaganda photos. For Sheldon Jackson, the narrative of Native people being, quote, degraded and unfit to rule themselves was part of getting funding for his missions. This isn't to say that he didn't sincerely want to help Native people, but Sheldon Jackson and other Presbyterian missionaries believed in the absolute incompatibility of Native culture and Christianity. Behind the loss of political power by Tlingit people throughout the 19th century is a loss of population and economic strength. In 1805, Russians estimated the population at about 55,000. By 1880, Tlingit people numbered only about 7,000. This devastating loss was continuing in the 1880s with endemic and epidemic diseases, as well as the consequences of loss and social disruption, alcohol, and violence that caused more deaths. Tlingit people were also losing economic ground from losing trade to incoming American traders and from the long depression in the 1870s. Still, in 1867, everything was potentially in play. Over the 17 years of military and Treasury Department rule, Tlingit people were able to retain some sovereignty, even if it were just an expedient for keeping the peace. But by 1885, thanks in part to Sheldon Jackson, assimilation solidified as the model for government Tlingit relations. Alaska Native people had no rights to their land or resources or to self-government. It could be that this would have happened even without Sheldon Jackson. But another legacy of these decisions is the narrative of slavery, a narrative of a degraded culture. Beardsley mentioned slavery in his report of 1882, but only to say that it is dying out by itself. Glass identified and freed 17 slaves in Sitka and issued a proclamation banishing slavery. Military authorities occasionally freed accused witches from being killed and punished those responsible, but they do not use Sheldon Jackson-style language condemning slavery or any other aspect of Tlingit culture. The Navy officials instead emphasize that Tlingit people respect justice and that problems are due to whites getting out of hand and would be solved with civil law. A sign in Totem Square that has probably been there for decades credits the Navy with, quote, abolishing the final remnants of Indian slavery, language that to me tends to support this narrative of Native culture as degraded and a problem the Navy had to clean up. In the summer of 2020, Sitkans were debating the removal of the statue of Alexander Baranov in front of Centennial Hall. This was in one of the letters to the editor that was urging retention of the statue. Even more surprising is the fact that the Southeast Alaska Tlingit clans sued the US government unsuccessfully to be able to keep their slaves when the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery in the United States was passed by Congress in 1865. Even though the facts don't survive, the narrative, unfortunately, does. And that's it.
Thank you, Rebecca. We will open up the Q&A to questions for Rebecca, and then if there's time, if people have more questions for Ann after that, we can circle back. But I appreciate the 3 panelist presentations and the windows into Sitka that you've given us, considering we can't be there. So, thank you. And Ron just commented, great presentation.
Well, thank you.
Give folks a couple minutes here.
I was going to say, Rebecca, that was a great presentation. It's a lot to digest, especially under our current circumstances of the world. So maybe people are just kind of trying to process it all. Amazing amount of research you did. Where did you find all that detailed information?
A lot of it is in congressional documents, and some of them I got. There's this thing called the Congressional Serial Set, which is like everything ever published for Congress. And I had some of those that I got when I was in DC in 2017. And then there's more and more that's published online, like things like online archives. That was a lot of the reports. And then the court records are at Juneau. And I just copied them with their camera, document camera that you can take pictures of them, as well as the deeds, those records.
There is a question that came in over in the Q&A, and it says, can you tell us a bit more about the slavery situation in the early U.S. period?
Tlingit slavery, it was part of the culture all throughout the Northwest coast, and actually probably worldwide. And it was very different from the African slavery system, which was the economic system. So slavery on the Northwest coast and throughout North America, well, and again, probably all over the world, was captives often. Sometimes people could, and I'm not an expert, but by the US period, it was on the way out.
A question just came in from Ron saying, during the earliest US historical period, did the military commanders make the distinction between military and civilian laws?
They were, and again, I'm not an expert, but they were in, it was a really fuzzy place because there really wasn't a whole lot of law that they were, because it was the army. And so technically they only had jurisdiction over, themselves. And so they had a jail and they, put people in jail, but I don't think any of that was technically legal. So there was no civilian law, or very, very little. There was just there was like a Commerce Act, like that was, you could collect customs, and I think that was about it for a long time.
Another question just came in on the Q&A. Mayana would have been taken to boarding school in about 1959. And she told me that her parents were not given a choice. Can you talk about the tactics that were used to take children to boarding school during that time?
Yeah, there were a lot of, there was a whole range of boarding schools and boarding school situations. And Sheldon Jackson it was a private school, and people had to apply and they had to pay tuition. And other schools, the BIA schools, often people were taken there, against their will, against the will of their parents. And so it really depended on the Wrangell Institute that, yeah, it was, yeah, no, there were, and that's the thing too, like some people went to Wrangell Institute and it was their choice and they had a very different, experience there. But a lot of times people were taken there, against their will and against the will of their parents. And it just exacerbated trauma.
Another question that just came in. Are you familiar with the book More Than God Demands by Anthony Urbina? You're talking with me of that book, which examines the agendas of Sheldon Jackson and various denominations' missions, especially in Northwest Alaska. Really interesting to learn more about that era and the assimilation approach, as well as the competitive politics among denominations.
Yeah, no, I'll have to look that up. And that's the other thing too, is like all the politics in every school was different. It was different in different times, and it was definitely different for different students.
And I'll just announce that we are beyond the allotted time now. So if folks have questions, and Anne and Rebecca are fine sticking around for a few more minutes, I'm sure that's appreciated, but just so everyone knows, it is 11:30 now. So any final questions, please ask them.
Before people start dropping off, I just want to remind everybody that our next session is at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and it's Sitka's history. And we have more presentations about Sitka, about Sheldon Jackson Boarding School, the Sitka Latter-day Saint history, and the historic bars of Sitka. A great combination. And the historic bars, normally we would have had a bar tour by Doug. So I don't know if we can sit and listen with our own adult beverage choice when he's presenting. He will be the last one, so it's maybe late enough in the day. Anyway, we look forward to that, and thanks everybody for this morning. And I don't know, Erik, if there are any more questions.
I don't see any more, but thank you to all the attendees and to our presenters.
Thank you.
I guess with that, we'll sign off then.
Thanks.